Hi. Okay, so he said my name. I'm Katelyn, if you don't know. So I'm an intern here. I help out with the youth. I do my thing here. But so if you don't know me, that's me, basically. And I'm not just saying this because she's here tonight, but I love my mom. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan. If there's a new picture, I'm showing you. If she's going away, I'm telling you I love my mom. So that brings me to my story. So it starts off with I used to waitress at Vovotillo in Waterfall, and on one of my many water breaks, I got a message on my phone from my mom to say she wasn't feeling well. So I was like, okay, maybe it's a headache, the norm. She said she wasn't feeling well. I asked if I should come home, and she said, don't worry, finish your day, then you can come home. So I did. I wasn't really worried. I didn't really think twice about it. I continued with my day. When I got home, chaos doesn't even come close to what I walked into. Not only was my mom lying on the couch, completely pale and throwing up, my dog was too. Right? It was like, what the heck happened? I left for like a couple hours. So my mom is a type 1 diabetic, and she manages her sugar like no problem. It's like kind of a non-event, but in this case, not feeling well, and she had really high sugars and vomiting. It's kind of a recipe for disaster. We just went on with the day. My mom was getting a little bit worse, but kept giving her water, life was happening. It's also good to mention that this was 2021 in like the January-February section, so like the height of the third wave. So hospital was kind of not really an option unless it was really bad. My mom got to the point where she realized she wasn't getting better, and she asked us to take her to the hospital. We packed her bag, and if you're going to hospital, please don't ask me to pack your bag. I didn't give my mom a face cloth or soap, and I gave her a winter gown in the dead of summer. So don't get me to pack your bag. We got to the hospital. At this point, my mom was very weak, and she could barely walk. They got her a wheelchair, and they took her in. It was, as I said, the pandemic, so we weren't allowed to go into the hospital. And my dad and I waited in the parking lot. It was evening, curfew was 9 p.m., so we just sat and waited, and the security said someone would come out and tell us what was happening. A couple things were happening in this car. My gran was phoning me, being like, your mom's not answering, what's happening? And not knowing what to say. I was like, she's in the emergency room, but I don't know what's wrong yet, which is not great to tell your gran. I was convincing myself that my mom had a really bad case of food poisoning, and that was that. Like, they were going to give her something, she was going to get back in the car, and we were going to go on. My dad started messaging the family, letting them know what was up. My mom was in hospital. She wouldn't be answering her phone. I was still trying to convince myself that it was food poisoning. When I tell you I was convinced it was food poisoning, no one could tell me any different. There was a lot of silence between my dad and I, not knowing what to say, being like we were scared, just sitting, not knowing what to say to each other. And then me saying, Nando's is truly toxic, I wouldn't recommend it. My dad and I finally made the decision to go home, and we hadn't heard anything about my mom. To be honest, that night was really scary, leaving the hospital, not knowing what was wrong with my mom or if she was okay, not being able to get in contact. And it was weird, like they said, someone will come out, someone will tell you what's happening, and no one ever did. It was super scary. I woke up the next day and I was on a mission. I was going to find out where my mom was, what was wrong with her. No one was going to stop me. I started phoning the hospital. Let me tell you, the hospital doesn't like when you phone on a Sunday and sit on the waiting call center for hours. I walked up and down my driveway, and I was given no information on my mom. She was still in the emergency room and hadn't been assigned a doctor, so no one really knew what they could say or when they could say it. Eventually, I drove myself to the hospital, and I said, forget it, I'm finding out what's wrong with my mom. I got to the gate, and I lied to the security. I said I had an appointment on a Sunday. I got myself into the emergency room, and I became those nurses' biggest nightmare. There were people in the waiting room who had been they tested positive for COVID and were struggling to breathe, and they needed help. And then there was me. I was standing, and I refused to break eye contact with the nurse, who was incredibly overwhelmed. I stood there for a couple hours waiting for someone to come and tell me. Those hours were scary. Not only was I wondering, why isn't anyone telling me what's wrong with my mom? I was scared I was going to get COVID. I was sitting next to people who were coughing and couldn't breathe. Eventually, a doctor came out, and if you've ever met someone who is angry at the idea of you, it was this lady. I immediately felt so bad. She came out, and I could just see she was completely overwhelmed. Her ER was a mess, and they needed her, but I was standing and asking for someone. She came out, and she told me that my mom was her DKA patient, which was great, knowing no medical terms at all. She eventually told me that it was diabetic ketoacidosis, which I'm not a medical person, but basically means the insulin is not bringing the sugar down, and a whole bunch of other things are just not going great. She told me that they were trying to find my mom an ICU bed, but there were no ICU beds in Gauteng. So we spent the next afternoon phoning hospitals. They were phoning hospitals, not knowing where my mom was. At some point that she was going to Olivedale. At another point she was going to Midstream. Eventually they found her a pediatric ICU bed, which I was super grateful for, but I don't think my mom was, considering the bed was really small. The next couple days were not great. Just hearing from doctors, they never really say how a person's doing. Asking, how's my mom? They would say, this is her sugar, this is her blood pressure. I'm like, great, how is she doing? And my mom couldn't be on her phone in the ICU, so it was a journey of a week, to be fair. In this information of getting phone calls and just telling us little drips and drabs. They phoned us on the Tuesday. Well, they phoned my dad, and they let him know that my mom had suffered a heart attack. They told us on the Tuesday, but it had happened on the Sunday. So to some people that might have been like, what the heck, why didn't they tell you? To me, it was the biggest relief ever, because I knew my mom was okay. It was very scary, and I think my dad and I were shocked because we didn't actually know what was wrong with my mom or how she was doing. I mean, we dropped her off and we didn't see her again, and we were just getting little bits of information. When we heard this, I think we realized how serious it actually was. My mom got better in the ICU, and they eventually moved her to a normal ward. There were no beds in the hospital she was in, so she got moved to Mill Park, and we fetched her from there. My mom is basically a superhuman, because when we fetched her, they were like, she needs to take it slow. She's recovering. Her body's been through a lot. She got home, she walked up the stairs and had a shower. So she is a superwoman. Fast forward to this year. It was a load-shedding morning, so I had planned the night before I was going to stay up incredibly late and sleep straight through the load-shedding, so I wasn't going to be inconvenienced. My mom was at home, and my dad was overseas for work. And I got a message from my mom just as load shedding had started for me to come downstairs. If I tell you I was annoyed, I was so annoyed. I was like, I was going to beat load shedding. So I went downstairs and I found my mom in a similar state to the year prior. Knowing what had happened the last time, we were better equipped of knowing what to do and how to get her to the hospital quick enough. I took my mom to the hospital. She got put into ICU within like an hour of being there, and the journey started again. Only this time, I was allowed in the ICU in the room with her, and it was scary to say the least. Seeing your mom in the ICU isn't a great experience. So you look at 2021, and I was like so upset that I couldn't see my mom, to 2022 of being like, why can I see my mom? My dad flew back from his work trip, and we started again. This time being able to visit my mom, her not being moved hospitals, and living life. To say I was angry at the beginning of this year when my mom was in hospital is an understatement. I was furious. Why is this happening again? I really don't understand why we're doing this again. When I went up to my room after I dropped my mom off at the hospital to process everything, I don't think process figures it out. I was more in a panic of what? Like, what just happened in this morning? A verse popped into my head, and it's Hebrews 13, verse 8. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's such a simple verse, but in that moment, it's all I needed. My mom was fine in 2021. Why wouldn't she be fine in 2022? If he's done it before, he can do it again. It was so simple, but it really just helped me through. Another thing that helped me through was I messaged a couple of friends to let them know, and they said they were praying. So I knew I might have been alone in my house, but people were standing with me in prayer. So to wrap up, what I learned from this experience was God doesn't have to show us the entire picture for us to trust Him. He gives us what we can handle. What I could handle in 2021 was little bits of information, and I didn't need to see the whole picture. And I still trusted Him, and my mom was still fine. Then in 2022, He showed me a little bit more of the picture because I could handle it then. So I just want to say this. We sang it last week in a song. God was faithful then, and He is faithful now. It doesn't mean He's not faithful. He's not showing you the whole picture. He's only showing you what He thinks you can handle, knows you can handle. Thank you.